Plot exposed, says Felder, but Lanford doubts affidavit. The Atlanta Georgian, Wednesday, June 11, 1913. In new sworn statement, Gentry declares he came to realize he was dealing with bunch of Crooks charges. Lanford and Beavers' names were inserted. That the dictograph conversations in which it was plotted to trap Colonel Thomas B. Felder, Mayor Woodward and C. Jones were padded and altered in meaning is the sensational charge brought back to Atlanta in an affidavit sworn to by George M. Gentry, who fled to Washington after the conversations, in their alleged garbled form, had been offered for publication by A.S. Colyar, Jr., and printed. Gentry's charges appear to substantiate in a large measure, if not entirely, the repeated statements of Colonel Felder and Mayor Woodward that an attempt had been made to make them the victims of a conspiracy. Gentry said, in making his affidavit, "I came to the realization that I had been dealing with a bunch of crooks, and decided that the best thing for me was to tell the whole story." Cleared, says Felder. Colonel Felder said that he regarded the affidavit of Gentry as a complete invindication of himself. He declared that the explanation contained in the sworn statement of Gentry on the face of it showed Hat Colyar and Chief of Detectives Lanford had been in a miserable conspiracy to ruin his, Felder's, reputation by seeking to prove him guilty of attempted bribery. Mayor Woodward said that the affidavit bore out his previous statements that he never had mentioned the names of Chief Beavers or Chief Lanford in his conversation in room 33 of Williams House No. 2, where the trap was sprung. The whole thing was a frame-up. I was suspicious the moment I entered the room. I knew that something was wrong, and I was on my guard. In spite of that, they twisted and turned my statements around, as the original notes taken by young Gentry will show. Chief Lanford said he did not believe Gentry had signed the new affidavit. Colonel Felder said, "A dirty plot." Gentry's affidavit is a complete vindication. It bears out my statement that the whole thing was a frame-up on the part of Newport Lanford and his hirelings. Everyone agrees with me now that I was the innocent victim of a dirty, contemptible plot. The notebook is not in the hands of Gentry's brother. It was at the time he left Atlanta, but it is now in a safe deposit vault, and I have the key. I have given Mayor Woodward a copy of the affidavit, and I expect he will ask the grand jury to look into the matter. Incident closed. So far as I am personally concerned, the incident is closed with this vindication. Gentry will return to Atlanta within the next week or 10 days, and he may have something additional to say. As to the grand jury scouring the country for witnesses to find out whether I was carrying a concealed weapon on the day Lanford attempted to assault me, the matter could have been facilitated by them calling on me. I am a truthful man, and would have told them. As a matter of fact, instead of seeking to indict me, the jury should have been imprisoning Lanford for contempt of court. Never before since the early colonial days has a man assaulted or attempted to assault a witness before the grand jury without that body taking some decisive action. Lanford angry. Chief Lanford was angered at the developments and said that he did not believe that Gentry signed the affidavit. The affidavit was brought to Atlanta Tuesday night by E.O. Miles, a private detective, and given to Mayor Woodward. It was sworn to in Washington before Jeanette Henning, a notary public. Gentry said that he had fled to Washington on being informed that his arrest was imminent and that he would not be allowed to make bond. Miles said that Gentry was willing to return to Atlanta and that he promised to complete the month at his work in Washington and then come back voluntarily. Besides charging that the dictograph conversations were padded and altered in meaning, Gentry alleged that Colyar had made an endeavor to buy the original notes. Gentry's affidavit in full, as given out, follows. District of Columbia, City of Washington, personally appeared before me, the undersigned, a notary public, of the District of Columbia, George M. Gentry, who on oath states that on Wednesday, May 21, 1913, at or about 10 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Gay C. February called me over the telephone and desired to know if I would do some stenographic work for him. I told him I would, but that I couldn't get off until noon. He said that they were in a hurry for it and he would like for me to come at once. So I arranged to get off and went down to his office, and the chief told me he wanted me to take down some testimony, and he asked me if I could write very fast. Mr. February read Chief Lanford that I was a good stenographer and could do the work all right. The chief then told me that the work he wanted done required somebody that could be trusted all right, and I assured him that I always treated all stenographic work I did as confidential. Chief Lanford told me then that what he wanted me to do was to take down a conversation that would take place in a hotel, and he asked me if I thought I could take it over a dictaphone. Mr. Searles coming in at that time with a satchel, which he opened and which contained wires and other paraphernalia in connection with the dictograph outfit. Watched dictograph installation. After a few minutes, during which time Mr. February was absent, we went over to the Williams House No. 2 on North Forsyth Street, Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia, Mr. February and I was instructed to go into room No. 21 of this hotel. Mr. Searles and Mr. Colyar were there, and they probably had to make arrangements for adjoining rooms, as Mr. Searles commented to me that they hadn't decided vindicated, say, Woodward and Felder. Both assert Gentry's new sworn statement fully proves the existence of dirty plot, continued from page 1, just what to do with the dictographs. After a time, Colyar came in and instructed Searles to follow him, and gave me instructions to await his wishes. Later on, Mr. February came in, and I told him that if I had to wait much longer by myself, I was going back to the office. I was then allowed to come into the room, where they were installing the dictographs, one on each end of the bottom board of the bureau just under the bottom drawer on the back of the board, and the wires being run through the keyhole of the door between room 31 and room 32. The bureau was then screwed against the door facing. At about 12:30 I started getting accustomed to February's and Colyar's voices, went through rehearsal. At first I could not hear at all, but gradually I was able to hear more distinctly, and after an hour or two of diligent practices, I was able to use the dictograph and to distinguish voices very clearly. Right at the beginning I found that I would not be able to hear anything with the windows up. When they were closed it became rather stuffy, and this, coupled with the strain I was under, added to the distraction. I stopped particing at 2:45 that afternoon and went downstairs to the office of the hotel, where I awaited Mr. Felder's arrival. I saw him cross Forsyth Street, and after he, February, and Colyar went upstairs, or were just about at the top of the stairs, I started up and saw the three enter room 31 of the Williams house, located as mentioned previously. I then immediately went into room 32 and closed the door, partly, but did not lock it. The windows were down, and so I went directly to the table and placed the receiver over my head and started writing what I heard. I took down all the conferences that took place. At somewhere around 5 that afternoon I left the hotel and went to Mr. R.B. Bliss's house and took some dictation. From there I went home and changed my collar. I returned to the office of the General Fire Extinguisher Company, 376 Marietta Street, where I wrote the dictation he had given me, signed his letters, and then met Mr. February there at the office. We went to the Candler restaurant to supper, and from there we returned to the Williams house to keep an appointment with Colyar at about 7:30. At about 8 o'clock, Mr. Miles and Mr. C.C. Jones and Colyar went up to the conference room, and Mr. February and I to the information reception room. Conference lasted half-hour. I placed the retriever over my head, and in order to be sure that I would hear everything, Mr. February stood behind me and held them pressed tightly to my ears. This conference lasted about 30 minutes. Between 8:30 and 9:15 Wednesday night, Mr. February loafed about town, as we had an appointment with Mr. Branch and Mr. Pascal at 9:30 at the Williams house, and as they were not in the Journal office, we had to kill time until they showed up. I left Mr. February and Mr. Colyar at the Journal office at 9:15 and went over to the Williams house to wait for the arrival of the Journal reporters mentioned above. They came in shortly, and we went over to the Journal office, and all of us, Colyar, February, Branch, Pascal, and myself, went up to the editorial department, where a machine was selected, and I then went to work transcribing what I had heard. Right at the start, I made Colyar angry, because when I did not hear what was said, I put dashes, and so I allowed him to dictate several answers and questions which do not appear in my notebook, and which I am not positive that I heard. I did not hear Mayor Woodward mention Chief Beavers or Chief Lanford during the whole conversation, nor did I write it in the transcription of my notes, these names being evidently added by other parties. At 4:30 Thursday morning, May 22nd, I finished transcribing my notes and turned the papers over to Mr. February. Later on during the morning he came down to the office, bringing an affidavit which I had written for me to sign before a notary public. He told me that they had made only a few minor changes in the transcription, and that all I had to do was to sign the affidavit, which I did. However, I noticed that some interlineations had been made in my copy, or rather in Chief Lanford's copy, as I had no copy, refused Gentry copy. Colyar and the reporters, just before I started to transcribe my notes, argued as to the number of copies that should be made. They agreed that 1 copy should be made for the chief, 1 for Colyar, and 1 for the Journal, and that no more should be made. This kept me from having a copy. I had my notebook, however, and it was the comparison on my notes with the published articles that lead to my discovery that in addition to the several answers and questions which Colyar had personally dictated, other changes had been made, namely that insertion of the names of Chief Beavers and Chief Lanford in the conference with Mayor Woodward, Also many other variations occurred, changing the sense of the statement, and since they had my affidavit attached to the papers, I felt that I had been duped. As to the remuneration of my services, we'll say that the journal reporters, Branch and Pascal, agreed to pay me $5 to get the work written Wednesday night, so it could be published in Thursday's paper. Saturday morning, after the appearance of the article in Friday's journal, the Georgian's reporter came to the office and offered me either $25 or $45, I do not recollect which, for a copy of the conference with Mayor Woodward, February, Miles and Colyar, and Miles, Jones, and Collier's conference. I declined the offer. I then went to see the journal's reporters and told them that the Georgian had offered me money for a copy of the conference, and they agreed to pay me $50 to hold my notebook from Saturday until Monday. I turned my notebook over to Mr. Bryce, who gave it to his stenographer to keep until Monday. Later during the day, the reporters told me that the Georgian had gotten a copy, and so I was too late. I then went down to Mr. Bryce's office and asked Miss M., Mr. Bryce's stenographer, for my notebook, and I took it home and locked it up. Monday, when I went up to see Major Cohen about the $50, he went down to look for Mr. Bryce, whom he was unable to find. Later we went back upstairs together, and Branch and Pascal explained to him their promise to pay me $50 for allowing the journal to retain my notebook. However, some argument arose over the fact that I took my notebook out of the journal's office Saturday night. I told them that they had agreed to give me $50, not to make a copy for the Georgian, and that I had not made the copy for the Georgian, and had therefore carried out my part of the compact. They then told me to come back later on and see Mr. Bryce about it. I returned after a while, I believe it was around 1 o'clock, and Mr. Bryce paid me the amount in currency and took my receipt. Lanford hasn't paid. Chief Lanford has not as yet paid me for my services, from the fact that I have not rendered a bill. Saturday morning, before the publication of the Woodward Conference, held at 4 o'clock Wednesday, May 21st, as previously mentioned, and the Jones Conference held at 8 o'clock the same night, I went to the editorial department of the journal and requested a proof of what they were going to print. Colyar, who had one reading it, declined to allow me to have a proof, and so I left the journal building, suspicious. Saturday afternoon I went down to the office, carrying with me my original notebook and a copy of Friday's and Saturday's journal. I compared them all the way through, and upon seeing the many variations in what was printed and what I had in my notes, I realized that my transcriptions had been tampered with, and that I had just cause for the suspicions which were aroused by their refusal to allow me to read the proofs Saturday morning. Fears arrest when tricked. Having signed the affidavits at Mr. February's request, in which I swore to what I had heard, and seeing something entirely different published, I became very nervous and uneasy. Saturday night when I went home, a reporter called up and said he was one of the journal reporters and wanted to see me a few minutes. I told him to come over. He came in and introduced himself to me as Mr. Starr, the journal. My other and aunt recognized his voice as that of a reporter who had called shortly before I came home and said he was from the Georgian. They both rushed into the sitting room and told me that he was not with the journal, but was the same fellow that came a few minutes ago and said he was from the Georgian. He denied that he had said he was from the journal, although he had told both myself and my grandfather, who went to answer the doorbell, that he was from the journal. Just before he left, he informed me that a warrant had been sworn out for February's, Colyar's, and my arrest, and upon my directing him as to where the door out could be found, he departed, saying that he had got the information he wanted. Sunday afternoon at the office, someone called me up and informed me that I would probably be arrested Monday. I did not recognize the voice, and so am unable to say who it was. They also informed me that I would have to make bond in order to be released. I asked who it was, and they hung up or were cut off. Effort to obtain notes. Monday morning, Colyar requested that I turn my notebook over to the journal, and said he would give me $5 if I would show him a receipt from the journal for the notebook. I came near allowing the journal to have the notebook, but instead gave it to my brother to take home and instructed him to allow no one to have it. Developments later showed me the character of some of the people connected with this transaction, and it made me so ashamed of my connection with it that I was afraid I could not face the humiliation that I thought would naturally on sight, and also the fact that they had changed my transcription showed to me very clearly that I was mixed up with a bunch of crooks. I am prepared to read my notes whenever it becomes necessary. These notes will show exactly what I heard. The foregoing affidavit is made by me voluntarily, unsolicited, and no money or the promise of any remuneration whatever was offered to me for making it, my sole motive being to give the straight history of my connection with the now infamous dictograph affair. George M. Gentry, Jeanette Henning, Notary Public, District of Columbia,